Good morning and welcome, everyone. We're thrilled that you were able to join us. My name is Connie Cote, and I'm the CEO of the Health Charities Coalition of Canada. We're here today presenting a session on vaccines, and we're delighted to have with us our colleagues from Immunize Canada. This session is co-hosted by both the Health Charities Coalition as well as Immunize Canada. And I want to just give a special shout out to my colleague, Lucy Buki, who was very involved in developing this session with us. So today we have a very special presenter. Dr. Pham-Huy is here with us, who is going to be doing a presentation on vaccines. Many of you will have seen Dr. Pham-Huy's name on many different things. She is a Pediatric Infectious Disease Specialist. She works at the CHEO, which is the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. She leads the primary immunodeficiency clinic there. And in addition to doing both her clinical duties and her research duties, she also spends and dedicates a lot of her time promoting the understanding and usage of vaccines. And in today's world, that's something that we all are very pleased and thrilled to have someone like you leading this work. So we're thrilled to have you here with us today to tell us a little bit about vaccines. I know for members of the Health Charities Coalition, we work with patients, and we often get several different calls to our call centers asking about vaccines. In particular, patients want to know, how is taking a vaccine going to improve my health? Will it protect me if I'm out in the public? They want to know, I'm a caregiver. Should I have a vaccine before I go in and help the person that I'm taking care of? All those kinds of things. And so we've asked Dr. Pham-Huy if she would do a presentation for us today, looking at several of those things right across the spectrum, from what are the vaccines, what are their efficiency and their effectiveness, when should people have them, who should be getting these vaccines, and a little bit about vaccine hesitancy, because we also know that for some people, they're a little bit nervous about taking the vaccine. And so with that, I will turn that over in a moment. We are going to have, in terms of the schedule for today, we're going to have a presentation that's about 45 minutes in length. And then after that, we will have some time for some questions and answers. There will be a box at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. And so there will be an opportunity for you to enter any of your questions that you do have in that box. And so as we're going through the presentation, you can jot them down in there, and we'll be happy to answer some of those at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Pham-Huy, and we look forward to hearing what you have to teach us about vaccines in this constantly evolving world. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for the introduction. So yeah, I'm delighted to be here to talk about something that is very exciting, the COVID-19 vaccines. I have a lot of slides, a lot of information, so I hope everyone is awake and caffeinated. And I hope to hear a lot of questions, because those are my favorite parts. So let's see if this works. I will be sharing my screen. Tanya, can you confirm that you see this?
Yes, that works great. I can see it.
Okay, excellent. So let's just dive right in. So a quick disclaimer that I've been using for many of my COVID-19 presentation is that the information that I'm going to be presenting to you today is really up to today, January 29th, 2021. We've all been witness to how fast things evolve and how science evolves. And so I've tried to put as much web links as possible, because those would be probably the most up-to-date information. I have a long list of objectives for you today. So we'll go through a little bit about COVID-19 vaccine development. We'll review only the vaccines that are currently authorized for use in Canada, and then go through the vaccine recommendations. We'll talk about precautions, considerations, side effects of these vaccines, vaccine scheduling, and some logistics associated with them. And again, I think probably of interest to the audience today are vaccines, or COVID-19 vaccines, in the context of specific or special populations. And again, we'll end with a very important topic, which is vaccine hesitancy and how to promote vaccine confidence. So here we are a year later. I think last year, this is, what most people were thinking or feeling, not sure what lies ahead. And then the whole world got thrown into what seemed like a movie or a Netflix or a reality TV show. We went through lockdowns, we went through ever-changing or evolving guidance. We went through wave 1, now we're in wave 2. Things seemed better, then it got worse, and then things continue on. And as much as it feels like we've been living like this either forever or a very long time, or this pandemic has dragged on for longer than we were hoping, there are some things that for some people it seemed that it went really, really fast. And that's maybe in the context of vaccines or the development of COVID-19 vaccines. If you had asked me a year ago if we would be in this position currently of, authorized COVID-19 vaccine use and then actually trying to figure out how to implement, how to getting into people's arms, I would have been a bit skeptical, but here we are today. And so one question I'm asked a lot is, or concerned, and again, I welcome questions about vaccines. Questioning anything about vaccines does not make somebody, anti-vaccine at all, but it makes you, it's normal to have questions and wanting to be educated. So I think to answer this question, we have to understand the process. So yes, you can actually develop vaccines fast at the same time of them being safe. And so, the whole concept of developing COVID-19 vaccines at pandemic speed, I think first we have to understand how do you develop vaccines in general. And so hopefully the audience knows that vaccines really undergo a very extensive and rigorous testing process prior to authorization, and probably more so than any medical therapeutics we have, because we're actually giving this medical treatment or drug to healthy people. And so the stakes are higher. The threshold or the acceptance of any kind of side effects, the threshold is much lower. We don't want, as much as possible side effects when you're giving it to healthy people. And so these are the just standard phases of development of a vaccine, which was undertaken with all of the COVID-19 vaccines that are currently authorized for use and in clinical trials. In fact, we have phase 1, 2, 3 before approval, but it actually starts way before then in what we call preclinical trials. And so, before a vaccine is authorized, it has to be, developed in research, and then it's actually tested in cells, in the lab, in animal models, way before it's even started in phase 1 human clinical trials. And so in phase 1, we give it to, a handful, dozen of people, generally healthy adults, and we test to make sure that they're safe, that they actually do what we want them to do, which is to elicit an immune response. We try to figure out the dosing regimen, the schedule a little bit. Then once we gather a lot more data on phase 1, we enter phase 2 trials, again, human clinical trials. So then we tested in probably hundreds of people, and generally we try to have different subgroup, maybe different ages. We test the dosing that we thought was going to work well and was deemed safe. Sometimes there's 2 different dosing or schedules that's used. And then we have data from those trials. And if they look good, we choose typically a dosing or a schedule. And then we go on to really the gold standard, which is the phase 3 clinical trials, where we actually tested in thousands and thousands of people, very large trials. Generally, we want at least 3,000 participants, human participants. And the COVID-19 vaccine trials is, for the currently authorized vaccines, which I'll talk about later, we're talking like over, 40,000, 30,000 participants. These are very large clinical trials in the realm of clinical trials for vaccines. So, and in this stage, we generally, tested in adults initially, and then different subgroups. And the key feature in phase 3 trials is to test for efficacy. So we want to see, did it actually work? Did it actually prevent disease? And there's different outcomes that are measured. And is it safe? So safety and efficacy are the paramount key features of clinical trials in phase 3. And you have to gather all this data and then you show it to the regulators. So regulators are agencies in each country has a different regulatory process, which actually will review all of the data from, you know, pre-clinical phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then decide if it is safe, efficacious, and then decide on authorization in their jurisdiction. And so when we say, you know, is it fast, is it long? Generally, historically, developing a vaccine is a very long process because it's a stop and go process that requires a lot of money, a lot of resource, a lot of people, and a lot of investment up front. And so, you know, there's the research part, the preclinical start. The researchers have to get more money to then move on to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, etc. What we're seeing in the context of the COVID-19 vaccines in a pandemic is that there was, you know, the whole world wanted to get rid of this virus. And so there's been immense resources and investment from all over the world, science, government working together, putting, you know, millions of dollars of money into the research and the various steps of clinical trial. The other part too is that enrollment. One of the limiting factors in many of these studies is enrollment, but in COVID-19, people were invested, they wanted to help science, they wanted to get the vaccines. And so enrolling participants in these trials in relative actually went very fast, getting lots and lots of participants to enroll in the various trials across the world. And the other factor that was also helpful in making these fast is that, you know, ideally you want to study a vaccine. If you want to show that it works or doesn't work, you want to be able to study in a setting where the actual infection or disease is circulating or is happening. And so, you know, luckily, unluckily, we are in a pandemic. And so there's lots of COVID-19 going around. And so these manufacturers were able to show, you know, if it worked or not, because there was a lot of infection that was circulating. So those are a few of the factors that have made the development of this vaccine, you know, faster than the historical one. However, all of the steps of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and safety were maintained. And so all the criteria for developing it at that stage were maintained through these trials, and they will be kept to standard before they are authorized for use in a country, or at least in Canada. So in generally, what is the goal of having a COVID-19 vaccine? I mean, it's been a disease that has caused a lot of health problems, complications, and a lot of death. So that's what we're trying to minimize. And we would like to be able to provide, we would like this vaccine to be able to provide protective immunity, both short-term, but also long-term. We would like it to provide herd or community immunity, but that is still to be determined, as well as decreasing transmission. So this slide, again, I'm trying to reference all the websites that are that I've taken these slides, these slides from. But this is an amazing slide. You know, there's over 78 vaccine candidates and over 200 trials. There are currently 11 approved vaccines across the world. You know, so in different jurisdictions. This is amazing, just to show you how, you know, what we can achieve when, you know, science, regulators, government, and the population works together. Because it's really, I mean, to be honest, it's a true team effort. So COVID-19 vaccines, you know, in my mind, are really our best hope to end this pandemic. Like anything, it's a layered approach, and we still need to continue with our public health measures. A lot of the, you know, physical distancing and hand washing, masking, they have all shown that they do work. They definitely do work to slow the spread, flatten the curve. But in terms of, you know, really to end this, I think, and maybe I'm a bit biased, but I do think that vaccines are really our best hope. And so on December 9th, Health Canada authorized the use of the Pfizer-BioNTech mRNA vaccine. And on December 23rd, a second mRNA vaccine was also authorized for use by the manufacturer Moderna. And here we are, January 2021, in our current, you know, largest immunization campaign ever. just one quick slide just to sensitize the audience that there are many, many different vaccine platforms. And so not all vaccines are made equally. They don't all use the same mechanism or construct, or they're not made the same. However, they all have the same goal, which is to elicit an immune response. So have our immune system mount an immunity without actually having to deal with the actual disease or being infected. And so it's a preparation. It's to ensure that we're ready, that our immune system is ready once we are exposed to an infection. I am going to spend a little bit more time today just to talk about the RNA-based vaccines, just because currently those are the two vaccines that we have in Canada that are authorized for use. But before I go through a little bit more RNA, I think just one or two slides on what are we dealing with. And this is probably a repetition, because I think that with the media and throughout the whole year, everyone has become an infectious disease or virologist or immunologist, or at least knows what the virus may look like. But in case you don't, SARS-CoV-2 is what we call an RNA virus. And so, as you may know, viruses are very simple little things. They're essentially little balls of, sometimes they have a lipid layer, but inside they have some kind of genetic material, because viruses cannot do their bad things without host cells. So they have to use our human cells or animal cells or other cells we call host cells, and kind of inject their genetic material in order to take over the machinery of the host cells. So this is the fairly simplistic structure of the virus. It's got a lipid layer. It has the RNA, which is its genetic material inside. And then it's covered by these little proteins. We call them the spike protein, which then is used to attach to the host cell in order to enter it. And so this kind of like spike protein has been really the target. And that's what we guess. And I think we guessed, the researchers guessed right. It's really an important aspect of the virus. And a lot of the vaccines that are being developed are targeting this. So they're trying to mount an immune response towards this little spike protein. And going back to biology 101 that you may have learned in high school, our cells are little round things that have in the middle what we call a nucleus. The nucleus has where our DNA, so our main blueprint of all that is us, is inscribed, the instructions. And then the cytoplasm is that kind of like jelly liquid where the rest of our machinery for a cell is in. And so what happens is that the DNA is in the nucleus, but it cannot get out of the nucleus. So it has to get it translated. It has to like send a text message or some messaging to get out of the nucleus. And what it does is that when the body says, oh, I need a certain protein made, there's a message that goes in, and they transcribe a little piece of that genetic information in the form of what we call a messenger RNA. So it's really a message genetic instruction thing that then gets out of the nucleus and then meets little things in the nucleus called ribosome that then makes it into protein. So that's kind of in a nutshell. But I think it's important to understand, where does mRNA live? And also for people to know that we are full of messenger RNA. This is a very normal part of our biology and our cell function. And so what the researchers have done in developing these mRNA vaccines is that they have actually put the instruction. So because they wanted to target the spike protein, they put the instruction of how to make just the spike protein, so not the rest of the virus, and they wrapped it up in a lipid bubble. So in that bubble, when you give the vaccine, then enters the cell, never gets into the nucleus, stays in the cytoplasm, and then meets our protein making machinery, and then makes the protein. So all you have in the vaccine is just the instruction. It's just the recipe. So it's essentially the recipe of how to make this protein gets translated. And so the cell is used to seeing messenger RNA, will then capture this messenger RNA and then make this little blip of a spike protein, which then gets, presented at the surface. And then our immune system says, hey, I don't know the spike protein, we will make antibodies against it. We will make other immune cells, such as T cells, against it. And then you're ready. So that's in a nutshell. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them at the end. So these are the current vaccines. We have 2 mRNA vaccines that have been authorized for use, like you mentioned. This is just a quick table to kind of, show the similarities as well as the differences. So they are, they're very similar. They have slightly different dosing, slightly different scheduling, as well as storage requirements. I think the key message is that they were found to be both extremely efficacious. Efficacious meaning that they were able, the vaccine recipients were much less likely to develop COVID-19 disease, so symptoms of COVID-19 infection, compared to placebo. Placebo meaning that in these large clinical trials, there was a subgroup of half of the group received the vaccine, about half of the group received something that was not the vaccine. Mostly it was salt water, so saline. And the data is for 7 days after receiving the second dose. And we have data showing this efficacy up to about 2 months. Obviously, these trials are ongoing, so they're continuing to monitor the people who receive the vaccine to see if they develop COVID-19 disease. We don't yet know the really long-term protection. We think that there is going to be longer protection, but how long is yet to be determined. But for now, we know that at least it confers excellent efficacy for at least short term, roughly around 2 months, but most likely longer. So now, I think for the next 20 so minutes, I'm going to go through kind of a Q&A format, and we'll, again, lots of information, lots of links, and I understand this talk will be on posted on the website if you need to jot down the web links. So COVID-19 vaccines and the recommendations, I think first is just to understand who does what in Canada. And so Health Canada, like I mentioned, is our regulatory body in Canada. So they're the ones who review all the details, all the data, and then decide whether or not to authorize the vaccine. They also continue to monitor even after a vaccine is licensed for use. And I'll go through that in another slide later on. The Public Health Agency of Canada provides information about vaccines and immunization, and it also monitors for vaccine safety, both actively and through passive surveillance. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization is a federal body that also is within the Public Health Agency of Canada, and they actually make the recommendations on how to use these vaccines. So once they are authorized to be used, they make the NACI will make the recommendations on how should we be using it, who should be receiving it, and they review the evidence of the safety and effectiveness of the vaccines. And as you may know, in Canada, health is under the jurisdiction of provinces and territories, and so it is the responsibility of the provinces and the territory to actually decide how to implement it, so how to give the vaccines through their various immunization programs, which is why we don't have a national immunization schedule. Each province and territory has their own. So that's often a question that comes up, why are things different here, one province to the next? It's just the way the health is managed in our country. So I would highly invite people, if they are not aware about the NACI recommendations, and this is a link. This is actually in an evergreen or an online version because it is constantly updated with new information and new evidence that comes up. So, please, check it on a regular basis because there's lots of changes. So what are the current recommendations for the COVID-19 vaccines? At this time, NACI recommends that a complete COVID-19 vaccine series to individuals in the authorized group without contraindication to the vaccines. So NACI will make recommendation typically when there's data, when there's evidence, and based on what the studies were shown, right? And so at this time, this is like kind of the big recommendation. I'm asked a lot, why can't children receive the vaccine? And again, based on what I just said, right now, the current vaccine are not authorized for use in children and youth under 16 years in age for the Pfizer vaccine and under 18 for the Moderna vaccine, because we don't have the data yet on these populations. And so that's why it was authorized for this group, because this is the data we have. But we are hopeful that in the next coming months, we will get pediatric data. There are increasing number of manufacturers that are starting to enroll children into the clinical trials, including the Pfizer vaccine, which has, is studying children from 12 to 15. So we have not seen that data yet, but we hope to see some of those results in the coming months. Another question that comes up a lot is that, are there subpopulations that really should not be offered the vaccine? So again, NACI will make recommendations when it's like recommended if we have data, if we have evidence. But there are some populations which may not have been studied as or excluded from the clinical trials, or just low number, where, it's hard to give a strong recommendation, but these patients might still be offered it. So there's really one contraindication. So there's only one population or patients that should not receive the vaccine. And essentially, these are individuals with a history of anaphylaxis after previous administration of that vaccine. And so you must have a hypersensitivity or history of anaphylaxis to a component of the vaccine or its packaging. So that's the only true contraindication at this time. So here's a list of the population that were either excluded from the clinical trials or represented by small numbers. So these might include patients that are immunosuppressed due to disease or treatment, individuals with an autoimmune condition, pregnant people or breastfeeding, lactating individuals with a history of anaphylaxis or severe allergies to vaccines, or in adolescents 12 to 15. So in general, what NACI is stating is for these populations, the vaccine may be offered. It should be done on case-by cases with a risk-benefit analysis and discussion with the healthcare provider. And at the end of the day is, what is that individual's risk for acquiring a COVID-19 infection and proceeding to have a severe course versus the theoretical risk potentially associated with the vaccine. So this, leads us to talk a little bit more, like we talked about the contraindication, but a little bit more now on precaution. So like I mentioned, I think there's a lot of questions and concerns about the vaccine, but again, we are not talking also about a theoretical infection. This is a highly prevalent, we are in wave 2. Obviously the cases of COVID-19 varies across the country, but it is still a very real infection that is still circulating, that is not yet controlled. And so you have to put into context when you're having this risk discussion, risk-benefit discussion, what is the risk of COVID-19 disease? What is the risk of severe COVID-19 disease in your patient or in that person versus the risk of the COVID-19 vaccine? So here's a question that and you can change a little bit the scenario, but I've been diagnosed with a severe peanut allergy and I've had previous anaphylaxis. I carry an epinephrine auto-injector. Can I have the COVID-19 vaccine? And then the answer is yes. So even individuals with proven severe allergic reaction, but not related to a component of the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine, may be routinely vaccinated and do not need to be assessed by an allergist prior to administration. However, like all vaccines, we should ensure that these patients have an appropriate observation period after they receive the vaccine, at least 15 minutes, but potentially longer, up to 30 minutes. This is a guidance that's been provided by the Canadian Society of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, as well as many other clinical allergy associations. And this is a link if anyone's interested in reading the full statement. And just so you know, anaphylactic reactions have been reported in both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. They are being monitored very, very closely. All of the recipients who've had severe anaphylaxis that have been reported have recovered, and generally all of them occur within 15 minutes, and there's a few that occurred up to 30 minutes. There are actually a lot of non-allergic reactions that may appear like an anaphylactic, whether it's shortness of breath because of anxiety, syncope, different types of rashes. So those are important to assess as well, and also to report. But again, just to reassure, in general, most of these reactions, if not all, occurred within, happened very short after the administration of the vaccine. So an important question is side effects, and it's important to know what are the expected side effects and what could be considered rare or unexpected side effects. So I think one of the important things is to counsel your patients or the people receiving the vaccines that, there are side effects to vaccines that we expect. And there are local and then what we call systemic side effects. And local, pain at the injection site has definitely been a very frequent side effect that's been reported in more than 80% of participants. And so, you get the vaccine, and then within the, during the next hour or like within the day or so, it hurts, it's swollen, it's painful. So that I would say that is the most frequent side effect. But there are all other systemic side effects, which again is a reflection of the immune response, right? That is being elicited. And so fatigue, headache, muscle pain, chills, joint pain have all been reported. Fever in around, I saw 10 to 15% maybe of recipient, generally under 40, under 30 degrees, but still there are very rare that are high fevers. Generally, these systemic adverse events are mild to moderate, and they usually resolve within a few days after vaccination. They've also noted for both these vaccines that they tend to occur mostly after the second dose, and mostly in and less so in if you're over 56 years of age, so more in younger participants or vaccinees. Moving on to COVID-19 vaccines and dosing schedule. So what are the current Canadian recommendations for administering the second dose of the vaccine? I know it's been a lot in the media. So at this point, the official recommendation is to provide the complete schedule, so a 2-dose schedule, and as much as possible within the schedule that has been studied and is authorized, which is 21 days for the Pfizer vaccine and 28 days for the Moderna vaccine. However, it was expected that vaccine supply was going to be low at the beginning, and in extreme circumstances, and when I say extreme is in the context of high case numbers, low vaccine supply, and each jurisdiction has a different perspective on this. Studying the data, it was deemed that the second dose could be delayed up to 42 days. The reason the 42 days was chosen is because especially in the Moderna trial, there were definitely some participants that received the second dose, at latest to the 42 days. So there is some data on that dosing interval, although again, just to reiterate that the majority of participants in the clinical trials received their vaccine dose 1 and 2 within the schedule as recommended. So at this time, there's no data on maximal interval. There's been different studies to try to figure out, what would be the efficacy. But again, these are a bit, they're calculations. And so just to keep it, just to be cautious on that recommendation. And so it was, there is actually on the NACI guidance, there's a table that gives you different scenarios. If you're in a scenario where from an outbreak or a case number, an equity, and then, so there's different things to take into account if you were to consider this option. If the second dose is delayed, really it should be provided as soon as possible, because again, we don't know what's the maximum interval that will still provide protection. And again, like I mentioned, this is where you can get more information on the rationale or the recommendation. Lots of people ask about, do we need a booster? Is this an annual thing? Is this going to be like the annual influenza vaccine? At this point in time, there's no evidence on the need for booster doses or revaccination after a complete series, but it is currently being studied. So again, we don't know the long-term duration of the vaccine immunity. And so the clinical trials will be following the participants for 2 years at this time. Other, regulation, public health agency may be following some of these participants longer through other types of studies or surveillance studies. And so I think we will know later. As you can imagine, no one has 5-year data on COVID-19 vaccine. And so to be continued. What about, again, surveillance of efficacy and safety? I hope I can reassure your audience that vaccines that are approved for use in Canada are safe. They do have to meet very rigorous criteria of safety. And we have a good system in Canada. We have a system where there's regulatory oversight. Like I mentioned, Health Canada oversees every single step of the production of vaccine, from the ensuring quality control within the manufacturer site. There's lot control. There's constant review of data, quality monitoring. And again, we have a system of how to report or to find or to report adverse events following immunization, both active and passive. This diagram gives you a bit of a sense of how it's done. And this is going to be heightened for COVID-19 vaccine, but is also the same process that we use for other vaccines as well. And so the vaccine recipient gets the vaccine. Let's say this vaccine recipient develops a side effect that is not expected, or some adverse event after the vaccine. Again, at this point, it's not a causality, so it doesn't necessarily mean that it's it's caused by the vaccine, but it's something that happened typically within a few weeks, few minutes, short period of time after receiving the vaccine. It's reported to the provider that gave you the vaccine, for example, and that provider's responsibility is to then report it. And there's different forms that then gets linked to the local public health unit and to the federal, provincial, territorial immunization authorities. And then it's linked into a database in Canada that's led by the Public Health Agency of Canada. We also have a system of active surveillance. So in Canada, the majority of our pediatric hospitals are part of a network called IMPACT, which monitors for immunization, active immunization, adverse events, or vaccine-preventable disease. And so any child that is admitted for any vaccine-preventable disease or a potential adverse event after a vaccine is reported. So if we have any child that is admitted with COVID-19 and then has had the vaccine, this would have been reported as well. And then again, would invite you to visit this website. Health Canada is reporting the safety signals, any AEFI reports. Again, these are just reports. These are not necessarily causal, but again, these are going to be analyzed over time as well. I've had this question in the last few weeks about, there's been this mention of this mutated variants, and then what is known as the variant of concern. So do the current COVID-19 vaccines cover these or work for these variants? Right now it's being investigated. I think there are some of the manufacturers that have put out some studies saying that they believe it should cover. They've studied the antibodies of people who've received the vaccine and then tried to see if it works on these variants strains, seem to elicit neutralization. But again, this is an evolving matter. I think the neat thing is the way these mRNA vaccines are made. It would be not difficult. I mean, everything is relative, but not difficult to be able to adjust or modify the vaccine as well. And I think this is probably also a very important topic to your audience. Is vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines in special populations. And so there are a whole variety of different chronic medical conditions that have been or not reported to be associated with increased risk of severe COVID-19 disease. It's not a complete list. This is from Health Canada. This is from the CDC. Again, some conditions that are associated, like there's definitely enough evidence, and then some that we think may be associated with increased risk of severe COVID-19 disease. I think it's sometimes difficult to analyze these studies, but definitely something that has really been shown is age. So the older you are, definitely the higher chances of having severe COVID-19 disease and death. And as you can see, if you're over 85 compared to the 18-29 group, you have a 630 times higher chance of death. So special populations, I'm immunosuppressed due to disease treatment. Can I get the COVID-19 vaccine? I think at this time there's little data, but increasing data on this population. But I think in many conditions, probably the benefits of the vaccine may outweigh the potential risks of the vaccine. Just to keep in mind, this is not a live vaccine, so it's impossible to get COVID-19 from the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine. Same thing with autoimmune conditions. I would say it's a case by case, but in most cases it might be, again, benefits outweighing the risks. But the spectrum of autoimmune disease is very diverse. So if you're dealing with somebody with celiac disease versus somebody with complex lupus, etc. I'm pregnant, chest breastfeeding, can I get the COVID-19 vaccine? This guidance has changed a little bit over time, but the essential message is the same. Yes, please review with a healthcare provider. The different organizations for obstetrics and gynecology have put out consistent statements, essentially saying that women who are pregnant or breastfeeding should be offered the vaccination at any time if they are eligible and no contraindication exists. And these are from large societies in Canada and in the States as well. So logistics. So this is currently a big question. So we have these vaccines, they're authorized for use. Some people are getting it, so why can't we all get one now? It's really a supply issue, and as you may have heard in the news, it's even, there's other barriers that have come into play from the manufacturers as well. And so NACI had put out initially key populations that should get the vaccine first, based again on evidence, based on who gets sickest from the infection, who dies, and who transmits, and in which circumstances. And so essentially the key populations are those at highest risk of severe illness and disease, advanced age, high risk conditions, healthcare workers, essential workers, etc. I think I'm just going to, just for sake of time, maybe go through, I do want to spend a few minutes on the myths and the hesitancy. So here we've all kind of heard different things in the media, in the news, things that, and I think came out a little bit more before these actual vaccine and data came for review. Essentially, you could read all of this. All of these are false. Some of them are quite interesting. But then brings us to vaccine hesitancy, which is something that we are always, it's always in the back of our mind, anybody that works in education, advocacy, or immunization. So vaccine hesitancy is the reluctance or refusal to be vaccinated despite the availability of vaccines. And it really, is a combination of three big factors. I would say vaccine hesitancy is a continuum, and not everybody fits into the mold at the exact same point in time. Complacency, if you don't think that COVID-19 is an issue, that you somehow think that it will not happen to you, that if you get it won't be that bad. Convenience, obviously, if you don't make the vaccines accessible, available, then it'll be, we will probably increase some hesitancy or decrease in coverage. And, we need to boost confidence. And this is, this child is really happy to have her vaccine. And these are, the types of talks, and I think actually many of you are educators in your field, and so hopefully it'll empower you to build confidence in yourself in order to share that vaccine confidence with your audience. So I think I'm just going to stop here and take questions. I'm going to stop sharing and see if hopefully you are still awake, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I really appreciate is the clarity in the language that you used in your presentation. I was able to follow that entirely. So I now understand with much more clarity what the whole RNA process looks like. So thank you so much for that. So I will open it up for some questions, and I know that we do have one. The first one that came in is from our colleague Tracy, and it's around the Pfizer vaccine. And she asked that Pfizer initially recommended against administering the vaccine for individuals with allergies to either oral or injectable drugs. And she wonders whether or not this has been rescinded.
Yeah, I must say I did. So in the trials, when they were doing the trials, they were excluding people who had a history of very severe allergies or anaphylaxis. And it's not uncommon that when you're doing these large trials initially, it's a fairly more like they try to mimic the real life population, but there's obviously some exclusion. But I don't think I saw any official, at least not now, that oral agents and all that are to be excluded. So it's not a contraindication, really. The vaccine content is fairly limited. It contains like, lipids, salt, sugar. There's no adjuvants, there's no preservatives, there's no, what else is in there? We're not sure what the allergen is, but what we think the potential allergen is polyethylene glycol, which is so PEG. It is found in certain products and things like that. But so right now, yeah, so it's not a contraindication to, what was it called, like oral allergies or
to oral and injectable allergies.
Yeah, so not
or oral injectable.
It has to be a component of the vaccine or a history of having had anaphylaxis to the vaccine.
Okay,
I hope that's clarifies. Yeah.
No, that's helpful. The next question that we got was around some of the NACI recommendations with regards to other high-risk conditions and whether or not they should be prioritized. And so the question is, will NACI define this, or will Health Canada list, or will Health Canada do this? So in the presentation, we were looking at, will provinces develop their own guidelines with respect to defining who that high risk condition, what those high risk conditions are. And so really we're looking for some understanding of, how can we really determine who we define as high risk and who's the right entity or body to really be helping to define that. So can you give us some thoughts on that?
Yeah, now that's a very, very good question. It's a very, very difficult question that NACI is aware. In general, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization reviews evidence. And so, based on large studies, large systematic reviews of who is at most risk or things like that. And so it has been a very big challenge to say who is more at risk, like which chronic medical condition. If you have uncontrolled diabetes and you're obese and you have cardiac disease and you live in, or if you have just well-controlled diabetes, and so I think this is something that's still in the works, but it's going to be very difficult, I think, from a federal, from a National Advisory Committee to go into the very specifics. I think that it'll be a mix of evidence that we get through the different patient populations. And also, I think the province will be a big key feature, because at the end of the day, it is the province that decides how and who gets the vaccine. So even if NACI recommends certain things, at the end of the day, it'll be the province and territories that will make the distinction or the final say.
final call on that.
So yeah, but it's a very, like, I try to, in myself to look at it, and I know in meetings and different, even on NACI, so it's a difficult question.
Yeah, and certainly for many.
And I know it's a big question, and I'd like, yeah, exactly.
So thanks for that. Our next question comes from Kelly, and certainly, top of mind for many Canadians is the issue of COVID. And so Kelly writes that her dentist had suggested that people get sick after their second dose, and that she had not heard that before. And she wants to know, is this a real thing, or is this just an opinion that you hear when you're out in the community, when you're allowed out of your house if you live in Ontario?
No, great question, and happy to clarify. So like I said, there are side effects to the vaccines that are expected. And like I mentioned, it appears, at least for the mRNA vaccines, so both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, that side effects are a little bit, there's a bit more side effects after the second dose. And so I know of many people who received their first dose that didn't have barely any symptoms, and then a little bit more when they have their second. So it's not that you get sick. Again, you cannot get COVID from the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine. But yes, you may have a bit more like flu-like, or aches and pain at the site after the second dose. So I guess that's a real thing, but it is expected, and it was definitely reported.
So this is one that we received before the webinar that I didn't see answered directly in the webinar, or perhaps I missed it. But when we look at the efficiency or the efficacy of the vaccine in comparison to other ones, so for example, the flu, it seems to be that the efficacy of the vaccination is actually quite high. And so I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about that and contrasting it with what else is out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, 94-95% efficacy is like A+ in the world of vaccines. And so, and then the reported efficacy for influenza vaccine is anywhere between 40 and 60%, depending on the season, depending on the strains. These are two very different vaccine platforms, and also the way we surveillance or monitor it is also difficult. It is actually very difficult to truly monitor influenza every season. There's so many other variables as well. In fact, our current influenza vaccine don't work as well in older populations. The mRNA seems to perform quite well even in the elderly, and there was a lot of over, I don't want to put an age, I don't know what these days what elderly means, I don't want to insult anybody, but anyways, older populations, cohorts. But yeah, so in comparison, but it's not completely fair to compare those two vaccines. But yes, excellent efficacy with the mRNA vaccines.
Fantastic. We have another question here about any thoughts that you might have for how people living with chronic diseases, which make them additionally vulnerable to COVID-related medical complications, might be prioritized ahead of the general populations. And we've touched on this a little bit in terms of the vaccine rollout. We know that some provincial governments have been leaning more towards this, but would you have any recommendations to our members on how to go about doing something like that?
Yeah, so I think that once the vaccines are available for relatively the general populations, I think that the different patient groups, actually from an advocacy is going to be important. I think from the healthcare providers as well is going to be important to advocate. I don't know at the end of the day what it's going to look like and how the government or the provincial government or territorial governments are going to make the list of priorities, right? I'll tell you, I'm in, myself, I'm a pediatric infectious disease specialist. So we see every single case, like we're required to see every COVID-19 inpatient to our hospital. And so theoretically, we're in the first, priority group, priority 1 and I haven't received my vaccine yet. I'm anxious to get it. But I understand as well, right now, they should be prioritized to our long-term care and elderly population in congregate living. And so that's, and then what happened is that they're also going, the vaccine, the limited supply that we're having is going to the areas where there's higher numbers. Whether that's right or wrong, it's, there's many things the government has to consider. So, we're so down, I don't know, if we had tons of vaccines, it'd be easy, right? So I don't know the answer to that. It's going to be complicated, not an easy task to prioritize and sub-prioritize these different groups. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a really good answer for you, but I am I think talking to your providers, I think providers are also, I think each group are advocating for their patients as well, which I think is a good thing. So continuing to do that.
So another observation that we've had from one of our participants is that there seems to be a decrease in the number of people experiencing flu this year. However, COVID numbers are continuing to rise. And could you comment on what seems to be a parallel between those two?
Yeah, no, this has been, I've never, ever seen a flu or non-flu season like this. So there's probably many factors why we're not seeing influenza circulating. It's almost not circulating at all. It could be due to the lack of travel. We know influenza typically starts in the southern hemisphere, comes up to us. So there's probably that part. Definitely masking, distancing, and all of that helps. There's been massive immunization for influenza campaigns. So maybe all of those things are contributing to the fact that we're barely seeing, if any, influenza across the country. But COVID is there. And so once the virus has a host and it still is able, and people congregate and there's still infection, it's still circulating. So to me, it's not surprising, because I mean, as much as we do all these measures, which do work, it's still circulating, it's still there. And so we're not, I think we go through periods where we're able to control the numbers a little bit more. It's not eradicated. Hopefully, once we have more broad vaccine coverage, we will get rid of this virus.
Great. So we have one final question for you, and that again is, we know that there, at the beginning of the presentation, you talked about there's so many other vaccines that are in the pipeline coming up. And so we've been fortunate that the ones that have been approved so far in Canada do have a very high efficiency rate. And so as we move forward, can you talk to us a little bit about, if we do have one that comes forward that's approved and doesn't have quite the same efficiency rate that the current vaccines have, is that still a good idea that it's still being approved? And what will it mean in terms of providing some herd immunity for us and still providing some protection to our population? So could you comment on that for us as well?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question as well. And again, at the end of the day, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So if we go back again, that if our goal is to, decrease the morbidity, the mortality, the more severe cases, so again, it's hard because we started off so good with 95, it's at A+, but is a 60% efficacy, 70% efficacy, that's still better than 0% efficacy, right? And so in the grand scheme of a population base, I think it still definitely would be very useful to have a 60 or 70% efficacious vaccine. The question will come down to and we're very conscious about the whole equity and ethics of vaccine distribution and rollout. And so that's the hard part. But short answer is that yes, we should, if we have a 60-70% efficacious vaccine, then better than zero. I'm a half glass full kind of person. So and I would really like this pandemic to end.
Well, on behalf of the members of the Health Charities Coalition of Canada, we want to thank you for your dedication, for the incredible work that you're doing with the NACI Advisory Committee, your work at Immunize Canada. This has been a real pleasure being able to hear from you, understand the work that you're doing. We wish you all the best as you continue to develop new approaches for us and new guidance for us. So thank you so much. And we do hope that we'll be able to see you on the street or, maybe at a concert someday or something.
Oh my God,
like that.
would be so lovely.
So thank you so much, everyone. We will be posting a copy of this webinar to our both of our sites, and so that you will be able to go back and click on some of those links that were provided. So thanks once again, everyone. Have a fantastic day. Stay safe, wear your mask, wash your hands.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.